Okay, it's about 5:35 and we'll get this meeting started. Um, this is the Ward Road Corridor Study Meeting, our second public meeting for the Ward Road Corridor Study that we're conducting. Thank you for joining us. My name is John Ferruzzi and I'm here with my colleagues. Sorry, looks like having a technical difficulty there. Okay, there we go. I'm John Ferruzzi, the manager of the Mobility and Innovation Division of Arvada Public Works. I'm here with my colleagues Trung and Rachel from Tool Design, and we're going to be going over some of the information related to the project along Ward Road between 52nd and 72nd. Just to provide you with a quick recap and background of what we're doing is we're going to go through a process of going through some background information, demonstrating our purpose of the project, and then going through the schedule and where we're at, as well as getting into the overview of the corridor as well as the public input that we've received to date. At the end of the process, we're also going to go look at cross-section options and online map that we'll be sharing with you for some interactive information gathering, as well as go through a Q&A session if there are any questions and help answer those. So starting with the background and purpose of the project was started back in fall 2020. This project was a recommendation that came out of the Bike Master Plan, and that master plan was based on an effort that was completed with the community back in 2017. The master plan spoke to specifically to creating a low-stress environment for cyclists and pedestrians across the city, and specifically recommended the use of the trail system as a backbone of a low-stress bike network throughout the city, and then evaluated some of these corridors for connectivity and had recommendations that were citywide or broad within the document. We looked at the Ward Road corridor, and knowing that it has different characteristics and jurisdiction, for example, Wheat Ridge to the south, Arvada to the north, as well as CDOT jurisdiction as State Highway 72, we decided that it's fair to look at this in segments and break the corridor down and look at the context as we move forward to make sure that we're considering the land uses adjacent to the corridor while we're developing options and following the recommendation of the Bike Master Plan. Since that effort, we've had essentially some analysis that we started with. We have completed some crash analysis and essentially identified a purpose for the project, which is to have a safe and comfortable corridor for people walking, bicycling, and using transit as well as driving. And some of the things that we've heard are related to objectives that some of the things that we've heard have turned into objectives of the project, such as reducing the number of speeding vehicles along the corridor. This is a common complaint from residents, as well as concerns from our police department, and providing a dedicated bicycle facility, something that's comfortable and connected to other bike facilities along the corridor, and concentrate on upgrading the sidewalks, the curb ramps, the crossings, and transit stops within the corridor. So we've kind of looked at the corridor at the high level and started to gather information and analysis with data and input. And these are the purpose. This is the purpose that we've refined it to so far. So from that, we have essentially worked our way into developing a long-term concept, kind of the vision for the corridor based on the context, and then as well as looking at a short-term demonstration project. And the area that we're concentrating on is basically from 67th to 72nd Avenue for the short-term recommendations, given that the roadway has a built-out area but is underutilized and could be better utilized. So with that, just to kind of provide some information about the project schedule, we started our first stakeholder meeting back in November. This is a meeting with technical folks from CDOT, RTD, and different departments and divisions and agencies. And then we had our first public meeting in January. And in that process, we're also doing an existing conditions analysis. Following that effort, we started our second stakeholder meeting in March and went into developing concepts. Our third stakeholder meeting was in July, and now we're in the second public meeting to essentially wrap in together the technical input that we've received as well as the community input and refine the concepts that we've been developing. So we will be sharing that information here today. And now I'm going to pass it on to my colleagues to speak to the following technical elements of the project.
Great. Thank you, John. You can go ahead to the next slide. So I'm going to just touch from a pretty high level to provide an overview of the corridor for those that were at the last public meeting or who kind of reviewed the documentation from that meeting. This will be a little bit of a recap, but I'll keep it fairly succinct just to provide some context. John touched on this a little bit, but the southern portion of the corridor up to 64th Avenue is State Highway 72. So this is owned and maintained by CDOT. The very southernmost portion of the corridor falls within the city of Wheat Ridge, while the rest of the corridor is within the city of Arvada. You can go ahead to the next slide. Actually, sorry, you can go back one. Appreciate it. So there are kind of going along with the different kind of ownership context of the corridor, there are different classifications along the study corridor. So everything south of 64th is a state highway, while north of that is an arterial. And the roadway context does vary based on those classifications. You can kind of see a representation of how the cross-section changes shown on this slide. And so the speed limit is 40 miles an hour in that southern kind of state highway section from 64th to the south, whereas it's a little bit reduced to 35 in the Arvada northernmost section. Similarly, that southern kind of CDOT section generally has 2 lanes in either direction. In some sections, it also has kind of turn lanes in addition to those, whereas the number of lanes is reduced to 1 in either direction in that northernmost extent. The land use context also does shift a little bit with a mix of commercial and residential to the south of 65th Avenue and a shift to primarily residential north of about 65th Avenue, so the kind of northern portion of the corridor. You can go ahead to the next slide. So there are some kind of key notable features to mention. There are some critical trail crossings we are looking closely at, both at Van Bibber Trail and the Ralston Creek Trail. We've been looking at the sidewalk gaps that currently exist. There is currently a standard, a typical bike lane in the northern extent of the project that's shown in that purple dash there. And there's also a 2-way cycle track crossing at the Ralston Creek Trail crossing. Currently, RTD bus service is only operating on a portion of the corridor, and some of the routes have been discontinued due to COVID reductions, but it is also something we're being mindful of. You can go to the next slide. As part of our existing conditions review, in addition to conducting a crash analysis, which we touched on in the last public meeting, we did a traffic analysis, and we conducted an intersection capacity analysis, which showed that the intersections are operating at kind of what we would consider acceptable levels of service today. We also took a look at motor vehicle volumes and speeds, which helps us understand kind of the level of comfort and type of facility that might be appropriate for the bicycle facility. And the speeds and volumes do range throughout the corridor. There are generally higher volumes and speeds in the state highway portion of the corridor, that southern portion, but throughout the full extent of the corridor, speeds and volumes are high enough to meet the threshold for what we call a protected or separated bike lane. You can see those thresholds. There's an orange dot on this chart, and this chart is guidance from the Federal Highway Association that provides guidance for which facility types are appropriate based on speeds and volumes. So this is the key takeaway is that a really comfortable protected facility will be important for safety and comfort. So you can move on to the next slide. So John touched on the schedule and some of the stakeholder and public coordination that we've completed. Go ahead on to the next slide, please. So our first public meeting, we held this in January. We had about 30 attendees at that meeting, and we had an initial survey available to the public, and we heard from about the same number, 25 survey respondents in that initial survey. And that helped us kind of frame our focus and priorities. And as my colleague Trunk's going to share in a bit, we're continuing to request and receive input, kind of transitioning onto a more interactive map along the corridor. In general, we heard feedback that we need to improve crossings and address hotspots or hotspot issues such as missing facilities or access management problems and issues at driveways, things of that nature. So we're keeping all of that feedback in mind as we move forward, both with the short-term demonstration project as well as the longer-term design options. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Trung, who's going to talk a bit more in detail about the cross-section options that we are considering.
Thank you, Rachel, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for this public meeting. And I do want to say at this point, if you have any questions at all, feel free to use the Q&A function. We will have time at the end of the meeting to get to any questions at that point as well. But if there's something that comes up now or during the slides that I present, please feel free to chime in. And then, of course, this won't be the only time that you have an opportunity to engage with us. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So let's move on to the next slide. And yeah, these are just some numbers from the MAP survey as well from the early summer engagement. So let's move on to the cross-section options. And then we'll talk about the online map as well. So based on the input that we got from you, the public, from stakeholders, from city staff, and based on best practices for providing places that are safe and comfortable for people walking and biking, and then also, of course, based on the existing conditions that we reviewed and evaluated along Ward Road, we came up with a couple of options, two long-term options for Ward Road, and then a short-term option for the section of Ward Road between 67th and 64th here, as you can see on screen. So I'll speak to, and actually, sorry, I mean north of 64th. So the city of Arvada section has a short-term option along the entire length. So I want to draw your attention to the differences between the short-term option and then the two long-term options on this slide. So we'll start with this one. We'll move on to the next section, which is 67th to 72nd up to the north. So this is kind of the middle section. And then the final section, which is 64th all the way down to Ridge Road. And so you can see on screen here that the section between the 64th and the 67th is the most residential section. There are driveways that front, that connect to Ward Road. There are residential homes that front the roadway. Right now there's parking on both sides and then just a traditional bike lane. And so in the short term, there's a way to keep the parking, there's a way to keep traveling in each direction, as well as that center median, while making the bikeway a lot safer. And so across the board, folks who may be considering bicycling, but don't feel safe because they don't want to be struck by a motorist, the way to make a bikeway safer across the board is to provide some kind of separation. And so you can see on screen here that what we're proposing in the short-term option is to move the parking slightly in and then actually have the bike lanes on the outside next to the curb. So that would be the short-term option. Thinking more about the long-term option, and again, we're at a planning stage, and so there's not funding for right now secured for design and construction, and so that would be a separate effort altogether. But from a planning perspective, one option is to provide wide side paths on both sides. And so the advantage of this would be to allow bicycling and walking in both directions on both sides of the street. And then a wider landscape median, of course, is to provide more shade and more green space. So that's option A. And the option B is similar. You'll see this on the next two segments as well. But option B is similar in that you have just better sidewalk environments on both sides of the street. But we also are recommending separated bike lanes, one in each direction on either side of the street. So when we finally get to the online map in a few minutes here, we're going to be asking for your input on options A, and then option A, and then option B. So John, if we can move on to the next slide here. This actually looks fairly similar, right, to the section between 64th and 67th. But this section between 67th and 72nd, as you probably know if you've driven or biked or walked along this corridor, there aren't any driveways that connect to Ward Road along this segment of Ward Road. There are parking lanes, but because there's no access to residences or the side streets, there really is not a need for that parking, right? So really in the short term, it would be an easy kind of transition to provide separated bike lanes. And then really the most critical piece here is connecting to the Ralston Creek Trail, right? So if you live at the top of the hill, right at 67th or just south of 67th, how do you get to the trail right now? Because of that hill and because of the width of the travel lanes, we're seeing higher speeds than I think what we would want and expect. And so with separated bike lanes, that would be an easy and safe and comfortable way to get to the trail in that way. So you can see the differences between option A and option B is that option A is side paths on both sides. So two-way travel for both people walking and people bicycling on both sides of the road. And then option B is wider sidewalks for people walking in both directions, of course, and then bike lanes that are unidirectional. So one going northbound on one side and then one going southbound on the other side. So then let's proceed to the CDOT section. The CDOT section is a bit challenging. There isn't a short-term option because in the short term, CDOT is actually going to be resurfacing the roadway in the near term. But given the traffic volumes and the traffic speeds, there is not a safe and comfortable option for people bicycling in the short term. And sidewalk widening, sidewalk construction is also not necessarily a short-term option. So for this segment, south of 64th down to Ridge Road, we're really looking at long-term options only. So again, similar facility types here, side paths under option A, and then sidewalks and then raised bike lanes, unidirectional raised bike lanes in option B. Okay, so let's move on to this one. I'm gonna actually go through this slide. We'll pause real quick to look at the questions, and then we can go into the online map survey demo. So when we think about options A and B, and we're evaluating which one is gonna be better, right? There's no clear-cut answer, and that's why we're really looking forward to getting input from you, the public, and we're really hoping that you share the online map and promote the planning process to others so that we get as much input from Arvada residents as possible. So when we're thinking about these two options, pedestrian separation is one consideration. As you know, if you've been on any trail, but certainly trails in Arvada, that people walking, people bicycling share the same space, right? So that's kind of one thought here with side paths. You don't have that separation between people walking, people bicycling. With raised bike lanes in option B, you do. Motor vehicle separation is about the same in both, pretty high quality given the speeds and the volumes. Travel lane impact, it primarily just has to do with street width, and then similarly with curb and drainage impact. Crossing safety can be similar, but raised bike lanes provide a little bit more opportunity in at the intersections for more creative signal phasing and signal timing. And the intersection impacts are primarily just around what can be done at the intersections to make those crossings safe. And then in terms of cost, both options are going to require complete roadway reconstruction. And so this is a future kind of aspirational look at what Ward Road could look like in the future. All right, so I pause there. I'm gonna see what questions we've got here. Mindy, thank you for your questions. Let's see, so for your first question, for traffic car estimates, are you considering the great increases on Ward Road coming from new developments, Sables and Housing Station and Arvada, and all the new housing Wheat Ridge is building near the G-Line station? Yeah, thank you for that question, Mindy. So when we're thinking about the roadway for the section south of 64th, the travel lanes remain almost exactly the same, and even for the section north of 64th. So right now on Ward Road south of 64th, we've got 2 travel lanes in each direction. The traffic volumes tend to warrant that. And then north of 64th Ward Road is 1 lane in each direction. And so we're doing intersection capacity analysis at each of the signalized intersections to make sure that anything that we're suggesting is not going to result in an unacceptable level of service for the intersections. But all that being said, because the options are include facilities, bike facilities and pedestrian facilities behind the curb, and there's really no impact to the capacity of the roadways, we're really not diving super deeply into those, but we are considering the impact of those developments. So thank you, Mindy, for that question. Your second question was about removing the center left turn lane between 64th and 72nd. Will the proposed planner medians have gaps to allow left turns at each street along Ward Road? Cars will be very upset to have to stop to wait for someone to run in front of them. Yeah, so certainly access management is something. So you know, at the top of the hill, right, 67th, there is that median, the concrete median right now, which makes it impossible for left turns. But from a conceptual standpoint, we're really not looking at any other divergers. So primarily for all the side streets, those will still remain open. But right now the center left turn lane is wide open for the section between 64th and 67th, but in the future it'll likely be a consistent median. So thank you for that, Mindy, and glad to expand more on that if you have any further questions. Have you considered the people parking next to the Ralston Creek Trail on Ward Road? Terry, I'd be curious to know more about that question if you've got any more to add. Certainly, yeah, the parking next to the Ralston Creek Trail Road, the roadway certainly has parking on Ward Road right now if someone wanted to park on Ward Road to access the trail. But there's also the side street right there too that folks can park on, and so and it's actually probably safer and more comfortable for people driving to park on the side street. So thank you for that question, Terry. Any other questions before we proceed to the online map? Thank you so much for the engagement so far. All right, definitely feel free to continue adding questions. I think, John, at this point, you were going to stop sharing and then I was going to share my screen, and then we'll jump into the online map.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you, John. Okay, so let me share my screen. I want to share Google Chrome here. Can everyone see Google Chrome on my screen?
Not quite yet. Okay, now I can see your
Yes.
Google search bar.
Awesome. All right. So we provided the link to the webpage earlier. Don't expect anyone to memorize that, right? So I would just Google Speak of Arvada. So Speak of Arvada is the city's primary engagement platform. Go to the first link. The very first box that you're going to see is the Ward Road multimodal study, also known as a corridor study. And then if you scroll down, you can get more information about the project. But the important thing that I want to mention here and that I want to show here is the interactive map. So scrolling down here, going to map of potential designs, click on that, and it's going to lead you to this interactive map. And we're asking the folks to provide their information, totally optional. You can skip that if you want. We're asking also just demographic questions because we want to understand who is providing input. And And we want to make sure that the input that we're getting is coming from folks that are representative of the people that we're trying to serve and accommodate on Ward Road. So just a couple of demographic questions, and also just questions about how folks get around Ward Road right now. And then moving on, and if you don't want to do any of that, that's totally fine. You can click skip ahead to the map at the bottom of the screen to go right to the map. Now, the really great thing about this is that using this tool, you're able to place comments on the map. So instead of having to type out, hey, I'm talking about West 58th Avenue at Ward Road on the west side, you can just click on one of these colored boxes and then place a point and then provide your comment that way. So maybe let's say, hey, I'm really worried about these driveways for, I believe this is a 7-Eleven, I think, on the corner of 58th and Ward. And so I might, and I won't save this, but I might click on concerns, and then I'll click on the map, and then I'll say, hey, this is strong, and my concern is big driveways, you know, and then I'll click submit. And the really great thing is that we're going to have all this input geospatially located, so we're going to know exactly what you're talking about. But then we're also interested in what you like about either of these options. Maybe, you know, you can place, hey, I really like the raised bike lane or side path. Another advantage of this interactive map is that you can toggle between options A and B. And so right now we're looking at option A. Option A is the side paths, and the option B is the raised bike lanes and the sidewalks. And so you'll see it change a little bit. There's actually more variety when you get to the northern section of the corridor, but flipping between option A and option B will kind of let you see what is the sort of overall concept for the different segments of the roadway. And so this is going to be the primary way really for you to provide input. And this map is going to be open until next Tuesday, the 27th. So we're encouraging you to take a look at the map and provide your feedback that way. And then also to share the map with others, maybe others that live or travel along the corridors. That's going to be really helpful for us as we narrow and to kind of synthesize all the input into one preferred alternative moving forward. And so, John, if you'd like to, actually, you know, I can share my screen too. That's totally fine here. And we just have one more slide, and then can answer any questions if there are any more after we wrap up the presentation. So let me
Thanks, Tron.
this, and let's see if it will pop up. Are folks seeing the presentation right now? It looks like it's loading on my screen.
It's loading.
Okay. You know what? It's thinking too hard. So we're going to skip out of that, and I'll just scroll down to show you what we're doing next. So as I mentioned, the online map is closing next Tuesday. Time is running out. You've got one more week. Definitely looking forward to getting your input. And then after that, we're going to be developing a preferred alternative. So we mentioned options A and B, and we're going to narrow it down to one and then proceed with that one preferred alternative. So that is our presentation. We're really thankful that you all decided to join us this evening for this presentation. I'll pause and see if there are any questions or comments at this point. We'd be glad to respond to any questions.
If anybody has any questions that they'd like to pop into the Q&A, we can begin to address those.
And if you know, if you're in bed tonight and a question pops up in your mind that you wish you would have asked, feel free to go to Speak Up Arvada and contact us that way. We definitely want to follow up if there's anything else that comes up. So we'll just give it another couple of seconds here, about a minute, to see if there are any further questions, and then after that we can close. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, seeing none, I think we can end the meeting, and just wanted to be sure to say thank you for participating and joining us here tonight. And thanks to the project team also for presenting. I appreciate the information here. Again, Speak Up Arvada, we have that ability to go in and get your comments and get your feedback. Actually, it does look like we have a question that popped up in the Q&A. I'll go ahead and read that out loud. Do you have an estimated time frame for the long-term changes? So I can help answer that question. We don't have an estimated time for the long-term improvements. A lot of times the process that we go through at the city, for example, if you're seeing Ralston Road construction activity happening today, that effort started with planning almost a decade ago. So what we're doing here today moves into essentially a design process and evaluation of utilities, and there are sometimes ditch companies and other complications with right-of-way and things that we have to evaluate as part of our process, and develop cost estimates that then we go and seek budget using that information. And if the budget is quite high, it does take some effort. For example, again, with Ralston Road, there was a bond effort after we'd gone out for a sales tax request for the project. So yeah, it does take quite some time to just get these projects designed, funded, and then launched into the construction realm, which includes the purchase of right-of-way and going through an environmental process. So I would suspect it would be, about 8 to 10 years out before we start to see any kind of actual construction activity along the corridor. However, that's where we're coming back with the short-term improvements and trying to plug in improvements as soon as possible within the next year or so along the corridor, and help with some of the improvements in the near term while that bigger project is going to move forward in the background. Did we have another question that came up?
Don't think so. That might be it, John.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, seeing no other questions, thanks again for attending, and we'll wrap things up here. Again, Speak Up Arvada has the project information. We're happy to take any additional input and inquiries there, and thank you for participating. Have a good evening.